Hi everyone, welcome back. So now that you've had a chance to take a look at the lecture about romantic poetry, especially those aesthetic concepts or aesthetic categories like the sublime, the beautiful, and the picturesque, I want to take a look at a poem called The Tyger. We've actually talked about this indirectly in this class already when we talked about the character of Arnold Friend, that fiendish character who lures Connie away from her parents' house and presumably kills her. We read a scholarly essay in which the writers argued that he is kind of like a Tyger figure, a William Blake Tyger-esque figure. Now you'll start to see what those critics meant when they referenced the Tyger from William Blake's famous poem. A couple of things in terms of context to be aware of before we dive in. One is the Industrial Revolution. Like we just discussed in the last lecture, most romantic poets were disgusted by the Industrial Revolution, the smog that overtook London, the gloomy atmosphere, the rise of child labor and factories. These were things that romantic poets rejected, which is why so many of them flocked to the Lake District in England and really took solace in nature and the natural world. And they were interested in getting away from rationality and reason and focusing more on emotion and feeling and nature and passion. Another context to keep in mind is the French Revolution. Some have argued that this poem is referencing the violence and the horrors of the French Revolution, not necessarily endorsing or condoning the French Revolution, but that perhaps the Tyger references just the violence of the French Revolution. That's one potential theory about the poem. Let's take a look at it stanza by stanza, and you can see my annotations on the side and notice some figurative language and some terms that we're going to talk about. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forest of the night. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? Now, I know it's kind of weird. Nobody says symmetry, but to make the rhyme work, you would have to say symmetry in order for the couplets to work, in order for I to rhyme with symmetry. So bear with me. I want to zoom in on the alliterative burning bright, right? That's alliteration, the repetition of that B sound at the beginning of the word. But as much as this sounds like a children's rhyme or a nursery rhyme when you first hear it, when you take a closer look, you realize that burning bright's actually pretty symbolic. Maybe the Tyger does look like something that's burning if it's in the forest at nighttime, right? The forest of the night. If it's orange and black and has those streaks as it's moving through the trees, it might kind of look like it's burning or it's vibrant or on fire. But if the Tyger represents something more, and most people who read the poem think the Tyger represents more than just an animal, it might make you think of hell and hellfire, that reference to burning bright, or maybe just potency and vibrancy. Forest of the night also just sounds at first like kind of a creepy nursery rhyme type of location. But if we think about what that could symbolize, it's not too much of a stretch to say that it suggests some sort of unknown wilderness or some sort of dangerous area, right? I don't know if tigers actually are nocturnal. I'm not sure. You could easily look that up. But this Tyger who appears to be burning, who appears to be ferocious and scary, right? Something that's burning is terrifying, and who lurks in the forest of the night. Clearly, the speaker is setting up the Tyger as something terrifying and predatory, but also powerful and unknowable at the same time. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? If you look at the poem, you're going to notice that it's pretty symmetrical. We'll talk about the final stanza when we finish our close reading, but the first stanza is almost, aside from one word, identical to the last stanza. So the poem itself is actually quite symmetrical. We've got a series of rhyming couplets. We have stanzas that have the same amount of lines. We have this chanting quality when we read the poem out loud and with the rhyme scheme. The poem itself is actually pretty symmetrical. Many poems are also about themselves. They're self-referential, and this poem is incredibly self-referential. When he talks about God or when he talks about the creator, he also could be talking about himself as the poet. That might seem like a stretch now, but bear with me. By the end of this, you'll probably see what I mean. So immortal hand or eye, immortal means something that never dies. So that could reference God as the creator of the tiger. Could also reference somebody else who creates a tiger and who also doesn't die, in a sense, and who also creates a tiger with his hand or his eye. Think about who else that could potentially represent aside from God. And then it's kind of odd that symmetry is described as fearful. Think back to what we talked about in the last lecture about those aesthetic categories of the beautiful and the sublime while you close read those two words. In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? So basically, if we were to put that into plain English, he's asking, where did you come from? Did you come from distant deeps or skies? And if we think symbolically, distant deeps, that could reference some sort of hell or some sort of underworld, or skies could reference something like heaven or something celestial, or maybe he's just being literal there. So in other words, where did you come from? Did you come from heaven? Did you come from hell? Did you come from the deep? Did you come from up above? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? So we have two pretty huge illusions smacking us in the face. The first one is a reference to the Icarus myth, right? Which is an illusion we see all the time. Icarus, who famously in Greek mythology flew too close to the sun when he was trying to escape the labyrinth, and because of that, he fell into the sea. So anytime you see a reference to people aspiring to do something on wings and there being some sort of damaging or deadly result, most likely that's an Icarus myth. And a reference to the hand seizing the fire is also pretty obviously a reference to Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods to give it to mankind. We're going to talk a lot more this semester about the Prometheus myth when we talk about Frankenstein. The subtitle of Frankenstein is actually Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus. So we'll talk much more about Prometheus as the semester goes. Keep in mind these two big allusions to Icarus and to Prometheus. So basically what he's asking is, whoever created you and wherever you came from, that thing, that entity, whether it's God or someone else who created you, had to be bold. He had to be audacious. Words like dare suggest that you are transgressive, that you're doing something that you're not supposed to do. Also note that he is not capitalized. Typically, if you're talking about God, you would capitalize he, and yet here he is not capitalized. Maybe that's to emphasize just how powerful the tiger is. The thing that's created might be more powerful than the creator. Or it could mean that the he doesn't reference God at all. Or it could be meaningless. It could be insignificant. And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand, what dread feet? So this is where the poem gets even more kind of ambiguous and confusing. But one thing we can see pretty clearly when we look at this stanza is there's all sorts of references to physical body parts. Shoulder, sinews, that just means tendons, heart, hand, feet. In the first couple lines of that stanza, it's pretty clear that the sinews of thy heart are referencing the tiger's heart, right? Remember, this whole poem is an address to the tiger. The speaker is questioning the tiger in this poem. So it's pretty clear that the sinews of thy heart refer to the tiger's heart, and the speaker is asking who created the tiger's intricate, complicated heart. And this thing that created the tiger's heart had to have shoulder and art. Think about what those two things have in common, shoulder and art. If you're a creator, you have to have both brute force, shoulder or muscle, but you also have to have some sort of artistry. And if you think about how a tiger is just so awesome and cool looking, it does have a certain amount of like artistry and beauty to it, right? With those rich colors and stripes. But to create a tiger, you would also have to be incredibly strong. This might seem minor right now, but by the end of the text, I'm going to make an argument that the creator of this tiger isn't just God. The creator could also be someone else. So keep this idea in mind of a creator of the tiger as someone who uses artistry and creativity, but who also uses brute force and muscle. Then the second part of that, referencing the heart beginning to beat, the tiger's heart beginning to beat, what dread hand, what dread feet. It's kind of ambiguous whose hands and whose feet are being referred to. There, you could make an argument either way, that it's the tiger's dreadful hands or that it is the creator, as the creator is trying to wrestle this tiger into existence. What the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? So it's pretty clear that there's blacksmith imagery. Words like hammer, chain, furnace, anvil, the object upon which you would bang your hammer when you're forging something. The blacksmith imagery is right there in front of us. Keep this in mind, kind of put a pin in this. When we talk about Frankenstein and we talk about Victor Frankenstein, the young college student who creates this creature in his dorm room, who creates a monster in his dormitory, basically, all of this like blacksmith, hot, sweaty language is going to be used to describe the creation of Victor Frankenstein's unnamed monster. So keep that in mind when we get to that part of Frankenstein, just kind of as a side note there. Also keep in mind that William Blake, with this poem, The Tyger, created a corresponding plate. Here is a picture of it right in front of you. This is actually just a copy of it. So he used a really complicated technique. All sorts of museums have great resources in which they describe the technique that he used, but he used a pretty complicated technique involving engraving and etching and using copper, which would have been a pretty labor-intensive and physical process. So the reference to a blacksmith as this like divine creator, it might also be a reference to William Blake creating the plate, the Tyger, the copper plate, the Tyger, which I just showed you, and also creating this poem, which is called The Tyger. Note that the Tyger is spelled differently. There are several potential theories for why that is. I think it's just to sound a little bit more archaic and more old-fashioned. Given that William Blake liked to create his own mythologies, it makes sense that he might use kind of a more old-fashioned spelling. When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? So the big theory about the first two lines of the stanza that I read are that this is a reference to when Satan rebelled in Paradise Lost, in the epic poem by Milton, Paradise Lost, when Satan rebels and the angels throw down their spears and there's an epic battle. So that could be what the reference is there. But the second part, I think, is the more interesting part. This gets to the fundamental question of the poem. When the speaker says, did he smile, meaning the creator of the Tyger? We know that the he is referencing the Tyger's creator. Did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? He's asking something bigger, not just were you happy with what you made, and did the same guy or the same person who created the lamb also create the Tyger? He's asking something more profound. Think about what you know about lambs. In Western literature, lambs almost always symbolize Christ, right? The Lamb of God, something sacrificial, something pure, something innocent. So all these references to the Tyger as being kind of powerful or on fire, or these references to Satan in Paradise Lost, could set up the Tyger as a Satan figure, although I think he's more dynamic and more interesting than purely being a Satan figure, and could set up the lamb as being a Christ figure, this innocent sacrificial figure. It also could just be asking, how come evil exists, but also good exists? How could one God have created evil and good? How could one God have created something predatory and terrifying like a Tyger, and something so meek and gentle like a lamb? And aren't these kind of the fundamental questions that all religions attempt to answer? Why is there evil in the world? Why do terrible things happen? How could the same God who created something beautiful create something so terrifying? These are really fundamental, profound questions. So this is my favorite passage, or my favorite stanza of the poem, because it really gets to the core of what the speaker is asking. How can bad things exist? How can there be evil in the world when this same God created something as gentle as the lamb? And then finally, the last stanza, Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forest of the night, what immortal hander I dare frame thy fearful symmetry? Again, you really hear that chanting, incantation quality that the poem has. It sounds like a chant when you say it out loud. Also, it has this hammering quality. It almost sounds like somebody hammering on an anvil. Maybe that's a little bit too cute for you, but if you read it out loud and you really emphasize that chant, you can kind of hear that hammering quality. The only difference between the last stanza and the first stanza is this word I've highlighted right here, dare. So in the first stanza, it asks, who could frame thy fearful symmetry? In other words, who could create this awesome, amazing, terrifying tiger? Who could do it? Who is capable, right? Could means, are you able to? Are you capable of it? So what kind of God or what kind of creator could do that? Then the last stanza sets it apart. It's different. Dare. If you dare, you cross a line. You do something bold. You do something, like I said before, that's transgressive. So here it's almost as if the speaker is saying, whoever created this tiger, whether it's God or some other entity, had to do something shocking, had to do something bold, that actually there was some risk to the creator. Remember this imagery of like the hammer, the chain, this hot furnace holding this tiger down as it's being created because it's so powerful suggests that the tiger could wake up and very easily turn on the thing that created it. If you think of the he in this poem as being God, then it's actually pretty sacrilegious. It's suggesting that God is not totally powerful, that the tiger, God's creation, might actually terrify or scare God a little bit, which might not seem all that provocative to us, but it's actually a pretty controversial idea that even the creator of the tiger might have had a little bit of fear or had to actually dare or be a risk taker in order to create this tiger. Who could frame this fearful symmetry? Well, look at the plate that William Blake created. It's a pretty symmetrical plate that literally was framed with copper. So if you go back and look at the poem, you could substitute the he with the poet, right? And poets always have a God, I shouldn't say always, but poets often have a God complex. So you could actually substitute in the he for William Blake or myself as the speaker or the poet and have the poem make sense. Because William Blake, did he create a tiger? Well, not the animal, no, but he created the poem, The Tiger. Is William Blake immortal? No, he's dead now, but we're still reading his poem. Did he write his poem with hand or eye? Yes, he used hand to forge the copper plates. He made the plate The Tiger, and he used his eye and his artistry to create the plate. Is the poem itself symmetrical? Yes, the poem is quite symmetrical. So if you go through it on every level, he could be talking about the enterprise of writing, creating something. In this case, not a literal tiger, but creating the poem, The Tiger, and creating the plate, The Tiger. So he could be comparing himself as the creator to God. And if you know anything about William Blake, you know that he had some pretty radical ideas. This is not too far off. I want you to go back and look for elements of the sublime. Look for how the tiger is depicted as the sublime. This will be really hard to do if you haven't viewed the previous lecture, so please make sure that you do that. One more thing that I didn't mention that I should mention now. The tiger comes from his collection of poems called Songs of Experience. Many of those poems are kind of dark or depressing. There's poems about children who are chimney sweeps. There's poems about the smog in London and all the horrible conditions in London. On the flip side, he wrote a collection called Songs of Experience that has the poem The Lamb in it, and he also created a plate using his special technique for the poem The Lamb.